Hey, apparently we're live.
Yay!
Welcome, everyone, to Your List Suck. Today, we'll be discussing the best horror films of all time. And no, Cody's not here. He was a little scared, I guess. And he called me up again. I guess I didn't do that much of a horrible job with the previous show. Maybe I did and nobody else wanted a job, so who knows. I got a good panel tonight. Actually, a pretty solid panel. Mr. Douglas Cassel is back here. You're trying to redeem yourself from the sequel list?
I think I am. I think I'm trying to redeem myself. I think you're not going to have too much hate. You might have a little hate, but hopefully you won't have too much hate, and hopefully I won't get F or D, and hopefully I won't have the worst list here. I'm just saying.
I'm just hoping it's not like another It incident. So we'll see. Mr. Luca Fallon, it's been a minute since we've seen you around these places. How are you?
How we doing, man? I feel like I'm about 1,000 years younger than everyone here, and I have movies that are probably from like when you guys were like in your 40s. So, I mean, we'll see how that goes.
That is probably a very correct take.
How old do you think I am?
Like maybe like 87, 88.
Listen, you actually said the year I was born, so I'll take it. That's fine. I like that.
Yeah. I'm a little older than that, but whatever. And Mr. Kirk Kowalkowski, how are you doing, sir?
Hey, I'm
Doing
doing
pretty
well.
good.
I'm doing good. I'm glad to be here. I'm excited for this list. It's always weird doing positive lists because it's like you're all saying nice things. I think I'm better at it when we're just tearing each other down and being really insulting. But I'm curious to see how my list compares. What you think about Nazario? I think from what I've seen of you, I think we're both horror fans, but we're different kinds of horror fans. So I'm excited to see how you grade me here.
That is an interesting take. I'm sure I'm going to be confused by your picks. So, let's get this party started. First, we're going to start with number 10 through 8. Just mention it quickly. If anybody has us, give me a yikes, and we can talk about it later. So, in the order of the screens are in my screen, Mr. Douglas first. What do you got?
Cool. My number 10 is Pet Sematary.
Wait, which one?
The first one. I didn't say 2. Pet Sematary.
No, I meant the remake? Or
I'm sorry. The actual good one.
So you mean the remake then?
Woo! That's I don't know if I'm gonna like your list at all now. How dare you, good sir? Nobody has it. Cool. My number 9 is It Follows.
Ooh, I like it, but no.
And my number 8 is Friday the 13th.
Which one?
The original. The original.
Okay.
The one that has the good twist.
I don't expect any yikes, so let's talk about your number 10.
My number 10 is Pet Sematary. I remember watching this movie as a child. I read the book later down the line, and the book is severely better. But this movie is terrifying even to today. Zelda was scary. I wish they didn't remake it, and when they did remake it, I wish they stuck closer to the actual story because that was more terrifying. A toddler coming after you with supernatural powers is more terrifying than a 9-year-old girl or 13-year-old girl. How old ever? Listen, it's in the trailer. Get out of here with that spoiler alert. But no, I love this movie. Still to this day, it goes on my Halloween list. I watch it every Halloween. It's super good. I own the Blu-ray, and I own like 3 copies of the DVD. I don't know why I own so many copies of the DVD, but I do. My number 9 is It Follows.
A little bit about your Pet Sematary pick. I'm not sure top 10, but I'm not gonna give you too much shit for it. It's a solid movie. I personally think that maybe because it's a little of the deep end, the sequel is a little crazier, so it's a little more interesting to me. But yeah, out of the 2 Pet Sematary ones, you picked the right one with Gage because yikes on 2019. So next one.
You get Herman Monster in that movie. It's great. My number 9 is It Follows. Nobody likes it. I think this was an amazing modern horror movie to basically give everybody a an actual fear of what the rule is. Don't have sex in a horror movie because you end up dying because of a serial killer. No, you end up dying because this fucking disease becomes a ghost and manifests itself into a creature to kill you. And you can't escape it. There's no escaping, because if it kills the person that, dies, they go right back to you and it circles back around. I think it's an incredible movie. For a modern horror movie that kind of nobody saw coming, I thought it was great, and I think it definitely deserves to be talked about more if it's a best horror list, because it was inventive.
I agree with this one. Actually, I'm not sure. Again, I'm not sure top 10, but definitely a great modern horror picture. And there actually has been a pretty sweet revival in the last few years of good ideas for original horror movies. And I like that it's represented, even if it's for one movie in this spot.
And my number 8 is Friday the 13th. What hasn't been said about this movie? It's an innovator of the slasher genre. For it not being on anybody's horror list, I think that's crazy. It basically gave you the plot twist before anybody started to overdo the plot twist. When you find out that it's Pamela Voorhees that's killing everybody, you're like, what?
Spoiler alert!
Listen, if you're spoiling something from over 30 years ago, you can't use it against me. Sorry. But no, I definitely think this movie, it's a classic. If it's not on your list, I can see why, maybe, but I think it definitely deserves to be on a top 10 list. Even if it's higher up, I think it deserves to be on the top 10 list.
I'll tell you something, man. I am a Jason fan. I have watched and own all 12 films that have come out in this series. I also have a box set of the TV show, which is crap, but I still own it. The thing is that this series grew better later. I'm not sure the first one is the one you should be even mentioning anything anywhere near close of a top 10 list. To my personal opinion, the best one is Part 4, the final chapter.
Part 6, man.
That's top 3, I'll tell you that. And technically speaking, the reboot, it's actually pretty fucking solid.
Oh no, I actually like the reboot, except for maybe a couple points. The where they blow the illusion of how Jason gets around instead of just making him a magic man who disappears and reappears and kill people. That's the only part that I really hate about the remake. I just when I was making this list, I went with originality, and that was kind of something that was really original with the plot twist and everything else. So
it's a little rough sell, but and especially because you put it number 8, it's not even their number 10. So let's see what happens later. Luca, give us your number 10.
Cool. Yeah, let's get it ready for yikes across the board, I think, except for maybe my number 10. My number 10 is Candyman, Clive Barker based movie. My number 9 is Halloween.
Yikes.
No.
And my number 8 is The Shining.
Yikes.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. I like this panel.
Yeah.
So I'm going to talk about Candyman because that's the only one I get to talk about. Candyman's a really interesting movie. For a while, I would have said that my favorite Clive Barker-based movie was Hellraiser, because Hellraiser is like a really, really interesting movie, and there's a lot of like great moments in that, and the Cenobites are really, really good monsters. But Candyman is such an interesting story. There are some of the images in that movie are so beautiful and so almost there's such a gravitas to them, like the chest with the beads and the Virginia Madsen going through the mouth. They're such powerful images. Tony Todd is incredible in that movie as the titular Candyman. But also besides that, it provides such an interesting look at the kind of the racial skeletons in the closet of America, and particularly the relationships between the white middle class and the working class African-American people in the Chicago area at the time. That I just think it's an incredibly interesting piece of social commentary, as well as being an incredible genre film. It's so atmospheric. It's so scary. Tony Todd is so terrifying in that movie. And one of the things that I always find that really gets me with horror movies is soundtrack and score. And Philip Glass's score for that movie is just one of the best horror scores of all time. It's incredible. Like that titular do is so it just gets you right there. It's an incredible film. Halloween, The Shining, we'll talk about later, but I just think Candyman needs to be mentioned because it's to my mind the best Western horror movie of the 90s.
Actually, Tony Todd is pretty incredible in that movie.
So
And
good.
there was this is if you want a movie with scary bees, this is the one you should think about. Not
Well,
that
we will
Nick
talk
Cage.
about we will talk about that in a bit.
Oh,
Like
yeah.
let's get onto that later.
Oof,
Oh, Oh no!
it's a scary thought. But actually, I think the problem with Candyman is that it had so much potential that I don't think I think it should have spawned a better series than it did. But that
Sure, but
that
like,
original
it's the one movie, right? Like the original movie is what we're talking about here. It's
Yes.
not it's
That
not
movie,
franchises.
that movie in itself, yes, totally deserves a spot in this list. And yeah, somebody put it in the comments. Shining being a 7 is pretty rough, man. I expect brilliance after that.
Of course.
So, let's move on to Kirk. Kirk, what do you got at number 10?
Okay, my number 10 is Hereditary.
Oh,
I wish, man.
My number 9 is Eyes Without a Face. And my number 8 is Carnival of Souls. Okay. All right. Let's start at number 10, Hereditary. This is a personal pick for me. This movie really had an impact on me. I feel like Hereditary does what horror movies are supposed to do. The whole reason we watch horror movies is because they take something that is in real life terrifying and hard to think about, and it kind of compacts it to something that we can look at and even enjoy, and it gives us kind of like a catharsis. And, Hereditary is about, all the things in your life that's predetermined before you're even born, and obviously in the movie, it's the satanic cult and all the spiritual stuff that comes along with it. But I mean, it goes to, psychological issues, addiction, things like that. Anything, even like genetics, how long you're going to live, all that stuff is, just a lot of that's predetermined. And that's what really stuck with me with this movie for a really long time after I watched it. And just the atmosphere in this movie, the amount of dread you feel watching it. I was just sick, and I had a headache, I had a stomach ache. I was sweaty the whole time I was watching this. And that's really, I'm weird. I like feeling that way when I watch a movie. This movie did it perfectly. So yeah, that's my number 10.
I'm pretty glad, like I said, that the new horror waves are getting represented, especially movies that are so complete, like Hereditary. Ari Aster has shown in the little things I have actually seen. If you haven't seen Midsommar, I saw it on Monday, and it was also brilliant.
Go see it.
It's the kind of film that gets you excited to see what that director will do next. Mm-hmm. And Hereditary particularly is a movie we actually watched for Halloween last year with my wife and her friends, and they are all just in awe of that film. If anybody has not seen it, I really strongly recommend to look for it. It's a very good movie. And now, before we go to your next film, I think I don't look geeky enough for your list, so move on.
I love it.
Number 9 is Eyes Without a Face. This is a movie it came out in 1960, black and white movie. It's actually in French, and it's about a doctor whose daughter loses her face in an accident, and he kind of becomes obsessed with finding a new face. And so it's kind of like a Frankenstein, mad scientist kind of movie. And again, it's just got that gothic, black and white atmosphere to it. And the fact that it's in a foreign language adds a little bit more to like the mystery to it for me anyway. But there's some really great and really like disgusting body horror in here with, they actually show in detail like the removal of the face, the replacing the face. And, it just has some iconic images of the girl walking around, missing her face. And just the score of this movie is great. It's so bizarre. It's almost like carnival music. It's just a really it just really doesn't really sync with what's going on, and it makes it even creepier. And just the attitudes of the characters and the people who are doing this, and the matter of factness with which are doing it, is just really terrifying. And it's a movie I really enjoy.
I actually didn't recognize the name when I saw it, so I looked it up, and I have seen the poster for this movie, but called The Horror Chamber of Dr. Faustus. That I kind of knew because it was kind of like a weird re-release that they did. I don't know
Okay.
if it was only for my region of the world. I'm in Latin America, but
Mhm.
that's the name that they use. Apparently, it's the same film. I still haven't seen it though, so I cannot tell you how good or bad is your pick.
Yeah, it's
It's
a
unbelievable.
it's a good
incredible.
movie. You get a chance, check it out. My number 8, another black and white horror movie from the '60s, Carnival of Souls, 1962. This is about a girl who gets in a car accident. She's the only one who survives, but she's haunted by the people that were lost. And this movie it's got like a gothic, like real, like kind of grandiose atmosphere, but at the same time has a real gritty, like indie aesthetic to it. It's a little bit Hitchcock, it's a little bit John Cassavetes, brings together a lot of different elements of filmmaking to make this really scary movie. Some really nice, like low budget, but just great looking effects. A lot of really cool makeup. The ghosts and the monsters in the movie are really great, and just a lot of awesome cinematography. And just another one keeps you, on the edge of your seat. So that's another one I really enjoy.
I actually have seen this one, and it was a movie that I saw when I was pretty young, and I felt a little slow. I guess because it's basically that art style that when they made this kind of movies in the 60s, the rhythm. It was not as fast as it became later with the 80s and 90s films,
Mhm.
but it's very intriguing. It's very haunting. I like the atmosphere and the pale man that appears in several parts of the movie. He's actually kind of following her
Yeah.
through the story. It's pretty good, and it has a great ending that I did not see coming because I was 12. I don't know if it holds up, but if you've never seen this movie, I actually think it's a pretty solid pick.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's 10 through 8. Anybody has anything they had to savagely cut out of their list in the last moment, and as painfully you cannot mention it, you can give me 1 or 2 flicks right now. So Douglas, what do you got?
2 that I had to cut out of my list. When I was making it, I really wanted to put it on the list, but I couldn't find a spot for it. And one of them was Last House on the Left, the original,
No.
and the original Psycho. Both those movies are iconic for their own. I had a list filled up. I knew what I wanted to put on the list and was like, I know what I'm going for. So, but both those
You're
movies
going
are
for
incredible.
13 over Psycho. Got it. Luca, what do you got?
I think the first film that I want to bring up is I guess it's a thriller more than it is a horror movie, which is why I left it off the list. But Shion Sono's 2011 movie Guilty of Romance is a film that includes like a lot of like very, very intense disgust and horror. It belongs kind of to extreme art house cinema, which is why I kind of put it off to one side. Andrzej Żuławski's movie Possession is one that I also wrestled with a lot, mainly because Isabella Gianni's performance is so incredible in that, and the kind of the horror of married life and of relationships is explored in that really, really well. And then the one that was like really, really close to making it, which is like tangentially related to the one that Kirk brought up, is Midsommar. I genuinely think the Midsommar of the renaissance of horror movies that's happened in the 2010s is probably like up there with The Witch as the ones that I think are like the most interesting, the most good at exploring new ideas, and the most complete. I think the reason that I necessarily didn't put Midsommar on there is because I don't think it's a horror movie. I think it's a drama that has horror elements and is also like very funny in parts. So it didn't feel like as much situation in the horror genre to me.
Very interesting picks. Kirk, what do you got?
Doug mentioned one that was a bubble pick for me would have been It Follows. I really like that movie. Also, probably Let the Right One In is one that probably just missed my list. And then probably the original 1933 Invisible Man with Claude Rains. I'm a big fan of that one.
Invisible Man.
Yeah. So that would have came close to making my list. I think
pretty much all of the Universal monster movies came very, very close for me.
The
closest one was Son of Frankenstein, I think, for me. It was.
We will be talking about one later, but that.
I'm getting a very international vibe from Kirk.
Yeah.
I expect that sprinkling will keep going down later.
Yeah. There's a lot of good horror movies out there. But those three are the ones that were right on the cusp, just didn't make it.
I'm on the edge of my seat waiting for Juan of the Dead. So, Douglas, give us 7 to 4.
7 through 4. All right, this is where everybody gets to rip my list apart. Cool. My number 7 is 28 Days Later. This reinvigorated. I'm gonna wait for a yikes if there is. Sorry.
No.
I messed up. All right. So
Have
this.
you seen the panel? No.
I know. I'm the basic American guy who's on the panel. Okay. I'm your middle of the lane horror guy. It's okay. No, my taste, it varies. But 28 Days Later was super inventive. It gave us a new version of zombies, something that we haven't seen before, something that wasn't caused by mysterious forces. It was caused by us. We infected ourselves. And I think what it did to the zombies, to the scares, to the claustrophobia that we haven't seen that, in a while. I'm not going to mention the movie because it might be on my list later. But yeah, 28 Days Later, I love this movie. I think this is kind of a sweet spot for it. Some may disagree, but some don't have it on their list.
What do you guys think about 28 Days Later?
Yeah, certainly, like, as a Londoner, that movie hits a particular chord with me, right? Because, like, the particular scene where Cillian Murphy goes out from the hospital and emerges into London and it's completely empty. Like, as someone who spent most of their life in London, it's never like that, right? Like, that's not what London is like ever. You're never going to see that. So it was so weird to just, like, see Tower Bridge completely, like, void of all human beings. The thing that gets me the most in 28 Days Later, actually, is the soundtrack, because it's not a score. The idea is that, like, from how well it meshes with the atmosphere, you'd think that it's an original score, but Boyle is actually using music from a great band called Godspeed You Black Emperor to incredible effect. Like, the way the soundtrack meshes with what's going on in that movie is so perfect. Personally, I think that, like, I actually, kind of spoiler alert, I don't have any zombie movies on the list, because I think that while they're, like, a very important entity in horror movies, I don't think that, like, with the exception of Romero, who I think does it very well, I don't think that anyone's done the political commentary, social commentary with that particular entity in the way that I would have liked to have seen it. I think 28 Days Later was a really good attempt, but, like, I personally never found it that horrifying because I didn't relate to the struggle of the characters.
You have something, Kirk?
Yeah, I like this movie. It didn't make my list, but it's definitely a really good movie. It's Cillian Murphy's great in it. It's a great cast. And what Luca was saying, I mean, I've never been to London, but those scenes of just that giant empty city are just so intense. And just like Doug said, you never saw zombies run before. Just that first scene where they look up at him, and he realizes what's going on. He has to get out of there. That's really intense. And I really enjoyed that. I do prefer my zombies shambling, not running. So that may be a reason why it's not on my list, and we'll talk about some of my preferences later, perhaps. But no, I mean, this is not a bad pick at all. Nothing bad to say about it.
I agree.
Also, I think that it's kind of arguable that 28 Weeks Later is almost a better movie. Like, I know that that's kind of like a taboo thing to say, but I think that, like, in terms of, like, the filmmaking of that movie and the plotting of it, I think that 28 Weeks Later might actually be better.
Not really, no. So actually, 28 Days Later is pretty good. What I was gonna argue, which I thought was where you were going, is that I don't share it's really a zombie movie. It's an infected people movie, but they don't really have, like, the qualities you usually associate with zombies, and it's not even clear by the end that they cannot, like, be saved. They're infected. They have this virus, that rage thing going, but they're not undead. At least not during the film. And although I would say that it surprised me that it took a while for the sequel to come out 20 weeks later. It's like 5 years later in real time.
Mm-hmm.
I do like it, but I do think that the sequel picks on the first scene. I think it starts really, really strong, and then it never actually gets to match that energy, in my personal taste. 28 Days Later has a haunting final scene in the castle with the girl on the dress that is just beautiful to just stare at the screen for like 15 minutes. I actually think it's a solid pick, and well, I can say I'm surprised that nobody else put it, but I won't give Douglas.
I'm still waiting for my 28 months later film to come out. I want a fucking trilogy. Danny Boyle, get the fuck on it.
I mean, Danny Boyle didn't direct 28 Weeks, so like,
Good point.
hey, just
I
like,
don't
can I have a director to do this movie for me, please?
Give
Just
us,
have to get it out there.
give us your 6.
All right, my 6 is a yikes from earlier, and that is The Shining.
Yikes.
Okay. My number 5 is Nightmare on Elm Street.
Oh,
Close, really
The original.
close.
The original. Do not mention 2009.
Yeah, of course.
Do not mention 2009.
what
The
is
original.
2009? No,
Yeah,
it's 2009.
I don't remember. I don't remember
What?
Nazario. This movie, the first time I saw it, I think I was about 6 years old. And I was afraid to go to sleep for the rest of my life because I don't want Freddy to come in my dreams. Realistically, no. I think this movie is incredible. I think it blends the comedy and horror real well, whereas in later movies, it goes way off the deep end and gives you a lot more comedy than it does horror. I think the brutal murders, including the jail cell scene, I think the jail cell scene is one of the most horrific things that you can watch. Just somebody being hung. Like, literally, they're drawn and being hung. Like, real life, that's terrifying. Hangman nooses are terrifying to look at. Robert Englund embodies this character. And anybody that's ever watched this movie as a young kid has been haunted by their dreams. Yeah, Nightmare on Elm Street, guys, number 5. I think it's a perfect spot for it.
You okay, got something for this?
Yeah, so I absolutely love the original Nightmare on Elm Street. I think it's like one of the most iconic horror movies of all time. If you were to ask me like what's the best slasher killer of all time, I would say without a doubt it's Freddy Krueger. Like I've done that debate on Movie Battleground before. I rewatched this movie very recently because it's Halloween, it's October, so I'm doing that. The acting in this movie is not good. Like Robert Englund is great in this movie. The acting in this movie is not good at all. And a lot of the cinematography isn't great. I think that Wes Craven is such an iconic director and such a master of horror, but like I genuinely think that like as a filmmaker, the point at which he became good is Scream. Like just as a technical director. And like while I think Nightmare on Elm Street is like an incredibly interesting movie and a very, very fun movie, I don't think it's like actually technically that great. Like I love Heather Langenkamp to bits. She's incredible in New Nightmare, but she's bad in this movie. She's very bad. And I think in general, the whole film feels a little bit slapdash, a little bit rough around the edges, and it's kind of not as proficient as Nightmare would become at 3 and 7.
I wasn't expecting to line up with your opinion that much because yes, 3 and 7 are actually superior films in my opinion, but I actually think you're missing a bit with the original. I think that roughness around the edges is kind of part of its charm, and I will defend my girl Langenkamp on that movie. I think I can take everybody else is acting like shit, but she's pretty solid, and yeah, John Saxon is okay too, I guess.
I love John Saxon so much. Like Tenebrae is one of my favorite movies of all time, and he's so good in that. I love anything that John Saxon is in because he was in those like Gialli with Argento and stuff like that. But like,
So Kirk, why do you hate this movie?
I don't hate it. I'm probably gonna be saying this a lot tonight. I'm not a big slasher guy. That's never been my like subgenre of choice. So I'll spoil my list a little too. I don't have any slasher movies on my list. It's fine. I mean, I know the character's fun, and a lot of people enjoy it. That's cool. Just not my thing.
Okay, you're wrong.
First point is that it is not enough in French. So
Freddie didn't have,
this is not subtitled enough for Kirk.
Maybe he likes the Super Freddy sequence in black and white on.
Maybe.
What's number 4, Douglas?
My number 4 is a movie that got mentioned while talking about number 5. My number 4 is Scream. This movie is.
Wait,
anybody got it?
Yikes?
No yikes.
No.
Cool. This movie not invented, but perfected meta horror. Not even just that. Meta horror became something that was comical. And yes, this movie had comic scenes in it, but it was a self-aware horror movie. I remember seeing this movie at 9 in the theaters. Yes, I said 9 in the theaters. watching through my fingers like this. No, don't kill Drew Barrymore. What are you doing? Drew Barrymore. They got Drew Barrymore on the screen and killed her off in the first 15 minutes. Wes Craven had balls, and a lot of them. Nev Campbell's acting in this is superb. If you guessed who the killer was, good on you, because I didn't. I didn't think it was 2 killers. I thought it was maybe 1. But
Maybe.
I think playing off Randy was such a important character that people didn't give enough credit for. Just his spot on humor, but also his knowledge of horror movies and everything else. Overall, the scenes in this movie were incredible. The ones where she's running over the computer, 911. That scene is played off of when he first enters the bedroom. When Billy first enters the bedroom and Sid's dad tries to come through and he can't because the closet door and the door is paying off, and that gets paid off when she's trying to do 911. While I will give you guys the death by the garage door is not physically or anyway possible in real life, it was still a cool ass kill. But if you look at it, even once you know who the killers are, you can tell which Ghostface is which person. The clumsy one is Stu. The more cunning, the more sociopathic is Billy. And I just think the movie is so smart. It's so intelligent. I mean, it just went over a lot of people's heads at first, and I think it still does, because obviously it's not on anybody's list.
I'm actually very, very, very surprised that it's not on anybody else's list. So, what happened, guys?
Well, I think it's interesting because, like, Doug, you talked for a very extended period of time about the movie, but you didn't mention the best thing in that movie, which is Roger Jackson. Like, the Ghostface voice, I think, is the best thing in it. I think that Roger Jackson and Roger Jackson's dialogue in that film is the best thing in that film because it's so witty, it's so smart, it's so cutting. It's such an interesting commentary on horror films as a whole. My thing is, Scream is one of the best satires of all time. Whether I would call it like a legitimate balls to the wall, straight up horror movie.
Can I counter that for a second? Can I just counter
that? Yeah, sure, go. Of course.
Do not make a scary movie, man.
I'm not. But satire, that's absolutely Scary Movie, was the first real satire kind of horror movie.
No, Scary Movie wasn't a satire. Scary Movie was a parody. That's an extremely different thing. Spoof and satire are very different things. I genuinely, personally, I consider Scream to be more of a satire than I do of an actual horror movie. Maybe it's because I personally didn't find it to be scary, and maybe that's because I got to it quite late, right? Like I saw Scream for the first time when I was 18, as opposed to being 15. So maybe my personal experience with it has led me to appreciate its satirical and meta commentary aspects of it more than it as a horror film. Everything that I have on my list, I either saw quite young or is genuinely more horrifying to me. So maybe that's where the distinction is for me. I appreciate it more for the kind of smartness of it than the horror aspects.
I think that's actually a very interesting argument, especially with horror films, because not everybody finds the same kind of things horrifying. Some people like the more gore, blood and guts things. Some other people like the thrills more. And there's a very, very wide range of movies that everybody says they're horror. I saw that Mulholland Drive was actually categorized as horror, which makes no sense.
That's a drama. That's definitely a drama.
Yeah, but the thing is that I guess it's so broad that what may be horror for some people may not be for others. I would actually consider Scream to be horror, technically, even though I do not personally find it scary. I also saw it when I was 15 years old, but that's because that was the age I was when it was released. But it is actually a very smart movie, and I'm actually glad that it's mentioned, even if it's only by one person in this list. Kirk, what's up with Scream?
Yeah, I mean, I consider it a horror. I mean, I see both sides of the argument. It's definitely a horror movie, but it's also definitely a satire, even like Doug said, a meta take on the horror genre. It's a fun movie. I remember when it came out, I really enjoyed it. But I feel it's dated through no fault of its own. But I mean, like, we do have scary movies, so it's like this movie has now been parodied to death to the point where it's almost like an in joke on itself. So I don't not enjoy it. I do. I think it's a good fun movie. But because it is like that kind of like next level, whatever you call it, meta satire parody, it is by nature derivative of other horror movies. So that's why it didn't make my list.
The one thing that I feel the need to clarify is that I don't think that it's not a horror movie. I just think that it works better in terms of how it's commenting on horror movies and how it's actually embodying those genres, right? Like, I
More
don't think
smart
it's
than
not a horror
scary.
film. I think it works
I can
better.
agree with that it's more smart than scary.
Mm-hmm.
So, let's move on. Give us your 7, Luca.
Yeah, so my 7, this is, again, why I didn't necessarily think that Friday the 13th necessarily deserves to be considered like to be that much of an original movie, because if you're talking about like psycho mothers and mother killers, you have to talk about Psycho, which is...
Which one?
Psycho 1960.
Oh, I don't know.
100% Psycho
I think
1960.
the remake is a freaking good movie. I don't know.
Fuck. Yeah, the remake is the 28 weeks later of Psycho. I think that Alfred Hitchcock Psycho must need to be talked about this, because if we're talking about slasher movies, and I think we need to talk about slasher movies, especially in the Halloween period, because like they're such an iconic kind of rewatchable type of horror movie. I think that Psycho needs to be brought up. Hitchcock's obviously a master. He's an incredible director. The way he paces things, the way he constructs tension, the way he pays off tension, he's the master of suspense. We just talked about Scream, right? And Scream has the Drew Barrymore bait and switch. It's Psycho. That's from Psycho. We have the kind of shadowy knife-wielding killer with a knife like this from Halloween. It's Psycho. We have the kind of the atmosphere build up, the whodunit aspect of it, of the slasher, the who is responsible for this aspect of the slasher, the who is the killer. It's Psycho. It all comes from Psycho. It's where everything comes from. Like, I think that we point to Michael Powell's Peeping Tom a lot. We point to Halloween a lot. We point to another movie that I'm going to bring up way later down on the list a lot. But everything comes from Psycho. I think that even if you consider it to be a thriller movie, which I think is a decent argument to make, so much of that movie is about horrifying. So much of that movie is about getting into the mind of the killer and getting into the mind of the person who's committing these acts. And when I try to put myself in the mindset of an audience member from the 1960s, this is just an absolutely horrifying assault on the senses. I brought up music with Candyman, but Bernard Herrmann's score for this is just an absolute force, right? It's right at you, and it gets you right here, which is, I think, where the best horror movies get you, is like right here, just under the throat. I think it's an absolutely revelatory piece of work, and one that, even if we don't necessarily consider it to be a straight up horror movie in the same way that we might consider some of these other movies, we owe so much horror to it. So I think it needs to be mentioned.
I'm honestly very, very surprised that nobody yanked this one. It's Psycho is a Hitchcock masterpiece, and like Lucas said, it started a bunch of trends that later were evolved, and like everything, it's used to different effects, and it evolves with time. So, but yeah, it's like the root of the whole thing. And if you might not find it scary for a 2019 audience, it's pretty effective, if not as horror as thriller. And it has so many camera tricks that are amazing for the age, the year that it was made, that it really surprises me that, well, like, I can see Douglas not having it because his state is completely in the other direction. But surprise, Kirk doesn't have it. So I'm going to you first, Kirk. What the hell?
Yeah, this could have been a bubble pick for me. I mean, this is definitely top 15. Total respect for it. Yeah, it's a great movie. And the when you learn more about it and the history of it, it's so much more interesting. The fact that, it was, for Hitchcock, it was like a throwaway B movie. It was almost a joke for him. It wasn't anything that, like, he wasn't looking to create some masterpiece. This was just something he was having fun with. It came this close to just being a 2-part episode of Alfred Hitchcock Presents on TV. So that's just little things like that things that come together to make this great masterpiece. It's just mind blowing sometimes. But yeah, it's like, I think Lucas said it all. Just the psychology of this movie and how it's all about being inside this guy's head and everything he did and everything he went through, and like you just all the twists and turns on it. Yeah, it's a fantastic movie. Barely didn't make my list, but definitely belongs here.
Douglas?
I
Anything
mean,
to add?
I'm not bad. I'm not mad at the pick. Psycho's an excellent movie. It was my 11, if I'm being honest. When it comes down to it, for me, Psycho is that first half hour. I think that's the best part of the movie. The suspense is mostly there. Once you find out everything going on, it kind of loses its suspense, and that's why it gets knocked off my list. For when you're looking at me weird, but I mean, it really does. Once you find out everything going on, it loses its suspense.
I mean, if you find out everything going on within the first half hour, that's because you read the Wikipedia page for Psycho before you watched it.
I'd seen the movie probably when I was about 7, so there wasn't Wikipedia. Sorry, there wasn't even. I need to think about that. But no, there wasn't internet like that when I was growing up. Sorry, I rented this from Blockbuster Video. Hey, Nazario.
Hey!
Hey! I was a 7-year-old and figured out midway through what was going on. It's a good movie. It's a great movie. Is it Alfred Hitchcock's best movie? No.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. I definitely think I like Rear Window better.
Yes. That's a good pick. Rear Window.
So I'm sorry. I love the movie. It would have been my 11. But again, after you lose,
go home, Andrew. You're
sorry. Andrew Barr saying that Strangers on a Train is scarier than Psycho. I don't know where that argument comes from.
I will say something to Douglas' point. I think obviously that people watch movies, and you become a little more savvy with the more movies you watch. And for example, my wife was a person that doesn't watch nearly as many movies as I watch. She watched the movie with me for the first time when we were both in college, and she saw the twist coming way before it was supposed to be seen. I'm not saying 30 minutes, but she got it like when her sister shows up and they start talking about the mother, and they after the shower scene, she's like, is this?
It relies on a certain level of cine literacy, but I think that the reason that you can have that response of I know what's happening in this movie before I've seen the whole thing is because it's inspired so much, right? It's because you've seen Friday the 13th. It's because you've seen those like Psycho Biddy type movies. I want to shout out what Michael just said. The stairway scene from Psycho is also incredible. People give a lot of credit to the shower scene, but like the scene where the investigator gets killed on the stairways and he's like kind of going down the stairs in a very sort of surreal kind of way. I think there's incredible stuff in that film from a filmmaking perspective that is not just the mystery of it.
I actually think that is a stronger jump scare than the actual shower, because you get the point of view from the roof, top down, when he's like reaching the stairs and you do not know what to expect, and it just happens. And then the scene with the falling stairs is pretty sweet.
Also, that like straight down, like from not even bird's eye view, like straight down, like almost like floor plan type view, that has inspired so much. Like there's a scene in Spielberg's Minority Report that very much has that like straight down, you see everything going like almost like it's the Sims type thing to it. So it's inspirational to filmmakers from a wide variety of genres.
Okay, let's move to number 6 now.
Let's see if this gets yikes. William Friedkin's The Exorcist.
Yikes.
Sure, that's fair.
Fair. Number 5.
My number 5. I didn't just want a whole bunch of movies directed by people who were making movies in the English language. Takashi Miike's Audition is so unbelievable. This is the most recent movie on my list, actually, which I was very surprised by. This is from 1999. This guy is his wife dies of a disease, and he decides to audition. His colleague, he works at a TV show, and his colleague decides that they're going to audition for a show, but what they're actually doing is auditioning for a wife because he wants to start a relationship again. And they end up auditioning this girl who's beautiful and meek and quiet and submissive. But as he starts to court her and find out more about her, he discovers that she is severely messed the fuck up. And as he digs further and further into her history and the kind of person that she is, he maybe digs a little bit further than he should, and realizes that he is in way over his head. The reason that I love this movie as much as I do is that it's a film that, if it was directed in a different way, if it was presented in a different way, it would be grotesquely misogynistic, right? Like, if this film was not handled in the way that it was, it would essentially be a film about how you shouldn't trust women and how they're going to betray you and how they're going to take advantage of you and all that kind of thing. But Mike handles it in such a way that there's a sympathy created for this character, and that you understand all of the shit that she's been through. You understand all of the tragedy that's happened to her, and it creates this double standard where, along with the main character of this movie, you're almost falling for this girl, and you know that you shouldn't be, and the main character knows that he shouldn't be. But it messes around with perception, it messes around with personal experience, and it ends in a place that is so hard to watch, but also so difficult to understand, that the horror of the movie is almost like figuring out what you're experiencing along with the protagonist. I think that it does such a smart thing in terms of being very intensely focalized around this one character's perspective, and then showing you all of the twisted aspects of that perspective. I think it's a masterpiece, and I think that it's so brilliantly showing this subjective nightmare that it really just gets way to the heart of me, and I just think it's a masterpiece.
I'm a little surprised that, to give you your taste, I shouldn't be, but this movie kind of inspired I think a lot of directors that focus on the wrong part of this film and ended up doing more horror. Like they what is the word they said? Torture porn.
Sure.
Yeah, and that is a subgenre of horror that I don't particularly enjoy. Not really. So, but I think that this movie that has that element in it, it's not about that. It's more about the character and the relationship that the guy looking for his wife and the woman that he chooses build, and it developed in a very surreal and interesting way that keeps you hooked the whole movie. It is Japanese, so it's Japanese or it's
Japanese. Takashi Miike is Japanese.
It is Japanese. I don't want to sound racist, but yeah, it's a little difficult sometimes for me particularly, to identify with Asian films, because they do have a different timing, a different way to structure the films. I'm not even bothered the subtitles. I can deal with that. I have been dealing with subtitles my whole life.
Sure.
But it's actually one that actually connects with me. I don't have that many Asian films in high ranking on my oeuvre of films that I've watched, but this one is, I would say, in the top 10 that I have seen. And I am a little surprised that it's on somebody's list, but I'm actually really glad that it is too, because it's definitely worth it.
I want to pick up from something that you said, which is that the horror is not about the pain that's being inflicted on the person.
Yeah.
The horror is about the assumptions that we make about people, right? The horror is about how wrong we can be about things that seem so much one way and they're so the other way. Like that's I think the real nightmare of that movie. Like how wrong we can be sometimes about things that we take to be a certain way and that they just aren't.
So Kirk, why do you hate Audition?
I have not seen it. It's a movie that it's one of those ones where, from what I know about it, I want to see it, but I'm also, because of what I know about it, I'm not in a great hurry to see it, because there's a lot of kind of rough stuff in there. So I eventually I'll get around to this, and I'm based on Luca's description, it sounds very interesting, but I just haven't got around to it yet.
Douglas.
Well, I'm appreciative that you didn't add Juno or Ringu on your list, and you had Audition, which is one of the best Japanese horror movies. This movie when I saw it, I want to say I was like 18. My friend was like, check this movie out. It terrified me. Like, what? I didn't talk to people for like a week. I was like, I don't trust you. I don't trust you. I don't trust you. You're going to stick something in my eye. Get away from me. No, but seriously, I applaud you for putting this on your list. It's an excellent movie. I have nothing bad to say about this movie. It's Japanese horror done right. It's not about the jump scares, which most people think. It's not about the gore. It's literally exactly what you said. It's about our human nature and how we are so quick to judge somebody by a book rather than judge somebody by the cover rather than getting to know the book. And it scares the living shit out of me. This movie is what makes me not want to watch gore porn or anything like that because it's not fun. It's not fun to just squirm in your seat and just sit there and just skeeve out the entire end of the movie.
So let's move on. Number 4, Luca.
My number 4 is the main reason why I think that it's such an unnecessary thing that almost all horror movies are shot in the dark. The brightest and scariest horror film I've seen, Texas Chainsaw Massacre from Tobe Hooper.
Which version?
The original. I think that the thing about Texas Chainsaw Massacre is that people say that Halloween invented the slasher movie. People say that Psycho invented the slasher movie, but there's a movie in between those two that I think forms the most perfect bridge between the two, which is the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And even then, in terms of the conventions that are built up as the slasher movie conventions, I think that Texas takes it to a whole nother level. This movie feels like a documentary. It feels like newsreel footage. There is almost no blood in this movie, but it's grotesque. You can almost smell this movie. And the way that it creates this division between these upper middle class out-of-towners coming back to their old home and this family, the Sawyer family, who was just created by their environment and who were so kind of grotesquely unpleasant and so violent and so psychopathic, but they're a family and they're very clearly like a part of this town that this town has left behind. Tobe Hooper in this movie points the finger at affluent developing society and says, look at what you are doing. Look at the people you are leaving behind. Look at the people that you are considering monstrous and horrible and nasty and scary, because the only reason that they've gotten that way is because you have taken everything away from them. The thing that I think that people forget about the Texas Chainsaw Massacre is, like, besides all of the scares, besides the atmosphere, besides the sound design and the cinematography and the brilliant avant-garde camera work and all of the shots of skin lampshades and arms on chairs, is that it's a film about people who have had their lives taken away. There is nothing left for them to do. They do not have jobs, they do not have security, and they have taken to an entirely aberrant, alien, monstrous way of life to sustain themselves because that's what they've been pushed into. And, you know, coming from a position as most of us are, where we have the comforts of the backpackers going out there, to be faced with the encounter of something so horrifying, but that we as a society have kind of created, is just truly, like, chilling to the very core. There's a stench of death on this entire movie that I think is putrid and powerful, and I think it's an incredibly important piece of cinema that reflects on so much going on at the time in terms of political climate, socioeconomic climate. I think it's an incredibly smart movie while also just being a genuinely, like, grotesque, in your face type beating. I think it does so much so well. I genuinely think that it's a kind of a perfect movie. It doesn't put a foot wrong as far as I'm concerned.
I actually think that this is a very good example of a movie that should have been left alone. I think the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre in itself, it says what it has to say. It is everything that you mentioned, while at the same time being very, very good horror and keeping everybody in the edge of their seats. And then they made the sequel. And then they made the next generation, and then they rebooted it, and then they tried to reboot it again, and then they made a Leatherface movie, and none of it worked. I think the original film in itself was everything that it needed to be told in this story, and it definitely works, and it definitely earns a spot on a top 10 list if it was my list. But I guess sometimes people cannot let good things alone. I'm very surprised this time that Douglas doesn't have this on his list. What's up?
Hey, I like this movie. I don't love this movie. A lot of people really love this movie that found it early. I did not find this movie first. Unfortunately, I found the remake with Jessica Biel first. And that puts a sour taste in anybody's mouth. And when watching the 78, no, it was 70 something. I'm terrible at movie trivia. Why have me
74, I think.
74. It was 70 something. I was close.
We told you it was before Halloween.
I enjoyed. I can't even say I enjoyed it because the whole cannibalistic family kind of turns me off. Through the movie, people find them funny. I find that very distasteful. I find the portrayal kind of distasteful. We're gonna villainize people that are poor. I grew up as a poor kid. Why are you villainizing poor kids? I'm sorry that you may think you may hold your thing up.
I have serious thoughts about that. I have very.
But they did. They villainized a family that was considered to be Southern. They called them inbreds.
They didn't call them inbreds through any of that movie.
Actually, I'm pretty sure they do.
No, there's not a point in that film where they call them inbreds.
Okay. Well, then I might be mistaken. But I know that it gets mentioned in other films, and it's just, I don't know, it leaves a distaste in my mouth. People love it. It just leaves a distaste in my mouth. I don't think a certain class should be vilified like that. You can add
to this.
I have not seen this movie, and a couple of reasons. I mean, I think it goes to what you're saying, Nazario. Like, I've never heard this movie described the way Luca described it. To me, it's always just been lumped in with the rest of, it's Leatherface in there with Michael Myers and Freddy and Jason, all those guys. I've never really ever been, made aware of any distinction between those movies. But also something Doug was saying, the clips, and this is one of those movies you just kind of know a lot about from you just pick up on it. And the fact that like a lot of the stuff is almost, at least from what I've seen, seems to be portrayed as almost like darkly comic. And I can watch movies where horrible things happen to people, but when you show me something horrible happen to a person and you kind of push me in the direction of I'm supposed to laugh at that, that kind of turns me off. So that's those things I've picked up along over the years has kind of like kept me away from this movie. But I'll tell you what, Luca sold me. I've never heard of it described like that. I've never heard any. I've never heard the detail like that. So this is something now I definitely want to check out.
I think that
I would say that a lot of the things that you mentioned have been developed for all the sequels and the retellings and stuff, and a lot of people has degraded the original idea. And I can understand what Douglas is saying, because one of the tropes that I really don't like in horror is that of the crazy inbred hillbillies.
100%.
Kill people. And there's been tons of movies. Not only Texas Chainsaw Massacre, there's like 5 series I can think of that are trying to be based on that. And it doesn't
Hills Have
really
Eyes, Deliverance is a terrible example of that kind of thing. Like that exists in horror movies. And even like Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2, like Chopped Up is like a prime example of the thing that you're saying where they're vilified. I think the thing that it needs to be considered about Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the original one, is that yes, they're villains, but it's very, very easy to see the place that they came from and how they ended up there, right? Like the causes are very much intertwined with the kind of people that these people are.
I like I said, I can see your point, but at the same time, I don't think we need to villainize a class.
I don't think that it's villainizing
That's a class of people. That's a class of people, though.
Yeah, and they're trying to survive, and they're living the way that they live. Like I think that Hooper is like pretty sympathetic towards the Sawyer family in that movie. I think that it's made very, very parodic, especially in The Next Generation, right?
The
Especially
brother?
in the McConaughey
brother.
Zellweger movie.
I did not expect this to get this political.
Sorry.
But it is interesting. It is interesting. Let's move on. Kirk, number 7.
My turn. Okay, cool. Okay, my number 7 is The Babadook.
Movie's great.
Yeah. This is a movie where this is one of my favorite monsters. The creature design is fantastic, and it just, to me, and this may be blasphemy for a lot of people, but to me, the Babadook out Pennywise's Pennywise. And just the fact that he is just the embodiment of horror and fear and terror in an individual person's life, and it's just how he just sinks his teeth into people, and how he can become different things and be different places. It just the movie is so claustrophobic. I found it hard to breathe while I was watching it. It just, you feel the world closing in on these people, and the story of this mother and son. Ever since I've had kids, any horror movie that has kids in it, my perspective has definitely changed on. And just watching what that woman's going through and the pressure in her life of raising this kid by herself and all the problems he has. If you take the monster completely out of this movie, this is still a very terrifying horror movie. Just her life and what she has to go through. And you add the reality of the Babadook on top of that is it's just a great movie. Like I said, just the atmosphere this movie creates is so closed in. Even their house is just so small and compact and tight. And everything they do and everywhere they go, you just always have that fear, that lingering fear of, like I said, not even just the monster, but of their life and what they're going through day to day. So just really, like I said before, about how horror movies, take something exaggerated from real life and just expound on it. That's what this movie does, I think, fantastically.
I actually agree with this pick. It's actually a very good pick, and the whole movie keeps you guessing that if you don't know if the Babadook is real or not.
Yeah,
maybe it's just a creature in a pop-up book, a very creepy ass pop-up book, but just a book. And I have seen this movie a few times, and I'm not sure if the slightly gives you an answer. I think it leaves it more like what do you interpret from it.
Mm-hmm.
And that is also, to me, a very good sign of a film that keeps you hanging after it and leaves you thinking. I'm not sure if I particularly would put it this high, but I do respect the pick, and I want to hear what the guys have to say about it. Luca.
I love the Babadook. I think that Jennifer Kent is an incredible director. I'm so incredibly excited for The Nightingale, and to see what she does with that. That looks like an incredible film. As for like why it didn't end up landing on my list, I guess I personally have really been trying to kind of defer and show respect to the old guard, the classics, and like some sort of more recent, but not like super recent fare that I think has like really defined horror cinema throughout history. And like I personally think that The Babadook is an incredible movie, but it's more that I'm interested to see what comes from it than I am right now wanting to pay respect to it as one of the foundational defining Christopher films. So I guess I'm watching very much with bated breath what Kent does next and what we continue to see in the vein of The Babadook. I do think that it's one of the more important films of the recent horror renaissance there.
So Douglas, why is The Babadook better than Pennywise?
Hey Kirk, I'm an idiot. I'm just saying it. I'm an idiot because this would have made my list easily. At least in the top, at least in the one of the first 3 spots. This movie perfectly portrays mental illness. PTSD is something that not a lot of people talk about, especially not in like horror. And I think it connects with the audience. And if you realize what PTSD is, if you've dealt with it, you know what she's going through. 110%. The not wanting to get out of bed portions, the screaming at people that it isn't their fault. It's a really good horror movie, and I messed up. That's all I can say.
Luca's had enough.
Yes, he did not like. Okay, let's move on in the meantime.
Okay.
Number 6. What do you got?
My number 6 is Rosemary's Baby, and I'm assuming Luca wouldn't yikes that. Rosemary Baby is I love this movie. I've only seen it probably the past couple of years. I saw it for the first time, and I really wish. I mean, this is just a movie that's kind of been spoiled by culture. Everybody knows what this movie is, but you sit down and watch it, it doesn't become a true horror movie for like the last 10 minutes. Like it doesn't. I mean, you know something dreadful's happening, something bad, but it doesn't really tell you. I mean, it's basically an M. Night Shyamalan movie. You know, it has that big twist at the end where you find out.
No.
But I mean, it's M. Night before M. Night. It's because you come out and it's it's just the story of this woman and everything she's going through with her husband in this weird house, and all of a sudden it's the son of the devil. There's no real clue to that. I mean, there's little hints dropped in, but you're not going to figure that out watching it the first time through. So I really wish I could watch this movie coming in complete clean slate, none of it was good on, and see what that experience would be like. But still, Mia Farrow's great in this, and just watching her, the physical transformation she makes, the struggle, just like the world closing in around her, her neighbors, her friends, her husband, all kind of turning on her. John Cassavetes is fantastic as the just like that spineless husband who's just really out for himself, trying to make it about it's for the best of us, but he's really just out to further himself in his career. So yeah, just like I said, it's almost not a horror movie, but the horror elements that are in it are enough for it to make me list. It's just a fantastic all around movie.
Like I said, it's a broad spectrum, but I think you're safe on this one. I think this can pretty squarely fit into the horror definition.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Polanski directs the hell out of this movie. This is actually a kind of movie that is, again, very imitated, but it never has been duplicated. Many attempts has been. One of the worst ones I think is the Johnny Depp, Charlize Theron one. Yeah. Well, I don't even remember the name of that film, but he went to space.
The astronaut's wife.
Oh shit, that thing. And yeah, you have to have a special kind of gift to pull off a story. And like a lot of people will say, that is not very original. Maybe they can tell what's happening earlier. I think it's also something from the era, because these movies, you have to put yourself in the mentality that they were a certain way because things haven't been done before. Now we feel all savvy and smart because we have seen everything, right? But you get to appreciate the classics, and that is actually a very, very good pick for me. Douglas, what do you think of Rosemary's Kid?
I like this movie. First time I saw it, I was a little bit older, and I guess I kind of tainted my vision of it because a lot of people already ruined the ending for me. But it's like I still sat down. I still kind of see where Kirk's going with it, and kind of it's an experience in its own. For me, it just doesn't. Say what you want, it just doesn't rank higher than some of the other movies that I have on my list, and that's why.
Like Friday the 13th, right?
Absolutely, you can say what you want. Absolutely, but yeah.
What do you think, Luke, about Rosemary's Baby?
Incredible movie. Mia Farrow is brilliant in it. It's really, really incredibly well shot and uncharacteristically well acted for a horror movie. It's fantastically done. Roman Polanski's a rapist scumbag, and I didn't want to honor him. I'm sorry. It's literally as simple as that.
It's a point. It's a point.
It's a fair
So
point.
many political topics in this top 10.
Asterisk, I do not support rapist scumbags.
That's completely fair. I if it was purely a quality of movie thing for me, Rosemary's Baby and Repulsion would probably both be on my list. I don't want to honor Roman Polanski. I'm sorry.
I think we should move on. Number 5.
Okay, my number 5 is the first zombie movie on my list. It is
He should be.
Yeah, I agree with that. I second that.
First zombie movie on my list is Train to Busan.
Ah, Korea.
Wow, nice.
This one is this like I said, this is a genre I really enjoy, and just taking that, like you said earlier, Nazario, that how the Asian cinema is a lot different, the Asian horror is a lot different. I think that the differences here make this movie shine, and the way the story is told, the creature design. You see some new stuff with zombies that we really haven't seen before. Maybe like the next evolution we were talking about before, 28 Days Later. Just a lot of the effects, the makeup, the movement, the acting with the zombies is a lot of fun. The whatever on a train trope actually works in this. It's when I first heard about this movie, like, how are they going to do a feature like movie fighting zombies on a train, and it works. It actually makes sense. And the greatest thing about this movie is the characters. Actually, unlike probably any non-Romero zombie movie or most horror movies, I actually connected with these characters. I cried at the end of this movie. I cried at the end of a zombie movie. That's crazy, because that's how in depth you get with these. These are real people going through this ridiculous experience, and that just made it so much. Just iced on top of all the great zombie action, but really gave you something to feel and care about.
I will say something that it also got me. I'm thinking maybe we're thinking about the same thing, but the scene in the tunnel when the army is waiting for them because they think everybody has turned, and the girl sings the song that she wanted to sing for her daddy.
Yeah, that's rough. Like I said, having kids changes your perspective on horror.
Actually, it does. I will agree on this. 2016 and on, I have rewatched some things. Feels weird. What do you guys think about Zombies on a Train? Douglas?
I'll make this short and sweet. I've yet to see this movie. I get told to see this movie all the time. I gotta actually sit down and watch it. That's a fault of mine. I didn't get a chance to see it though.
That's the point. Hear about new stuff, great stuff, watch stuff. Luca,
I'm trying, guys. I'm trying. 13 hours a day. It's a little hard to come home and do other stuff.
What do you think?
So full disclosure, when I did my short list for this list, the only zombie movies on it were Night of the Living Dead and Train to Busan, because I both think that they achieved the same thing very much, which is this idea of looking at like communities of people and groups of people and focusing not on how scary and gross the zombies are and how good the effects are, although I think Train to Busan actually does that very well. But it focuses more on the human aspect, right? Like how the people there are impacted by it, how the people there have to deal with it, and how the kind of human response is. I think that I went into it kind of expecting like a slightly schlocky, like Iron Sky, Dead Snow kind of movie, and that's not what I got at all. Though I love those movies for the campiness of them. Like I think that I expected like a kind of a schlock type film with it, and I got so much more, and I was tremendously impressed by it. Again, my personal tastes don't go so much with the zombies, so it just didn't kind of strike that chord with me in the same way. But I do think it's incredible.
I do love some zombies. It's honestly one of my favorite horror genres. So it's kind of weird to hear people that don't prefer the movies, but I guess I get it.
I like the when the people are eating people. I like it more when they're people. I like the cannibal thing. What can I say?
They can actually tell you how it tastes, the flavor.
Exactly right. There's a human response to this. There's some this is delicious kind of response.
Nice
Which I'm a fan of cuisine. So what can I say?
All right, Hannibal Lecter.
Number 4, Kirk. What do you got?
My number 4 is John Carpenter's The Thing.
Yeah, now we're talking.
A masterpiece.
This one is there's not much to say about it that hasn't been said. I mean, this is just the most like atmospheric, tense, just like mentally terrifying movie. Just to watch these people again go through this experience is just mind blowing, and you're just glued to the screen every second it's happening. You got great cast, great performances in this tiny. It's almost like a play, just this tiny little setting that they're stuck in, and the the stakes are just unbelievable. You know, it's like this is going to take over the world if we don't stop it right here. These half a dozen dummies have to figure out how to save the world, and just like that blue collar mentality, I love it. And the effects in this movie, just those perfect '80s practical effects. The guy getting ripped open, the head running around, just as all those iconic scenes. So much to love about this movie. Great horror movie, such a fun movie. I have so much fun watching this.
The 80s gave us a bunch of great films, and this is one of the ones on top. The scene where they are testing the blood because they figure out that blood is not blood, it's something trying to imitate blood. It's one of the most tense things I've ever seen, and the twist of the person who actually is revealed to be a thing, it's shocking, and what comes after is it's insane. And the thing is, the way it morphs between recognizable creatures, dogs, people, whatever, into these twisted Hellraiser level versions of things, because it's just morphing in it. It's amazing. I forgot to ask which one you were talking about, but I'm glad you're actually talking about the Joker. And this is, oh man, this movie has, I think this movie's been done 3 times basically. Well, one is technically a prequel, but I do think that John Carpenter has done the best version. And this definitely belongs in this list. And you guys don't have it. Come on. Douglas, what happened?
Listen, Nazario, in terms of D&D, I rolled a nat 1. So I'm the Christian Harloff of this crew. I have yet to see the thing. I mean to watch it. I really do. I always need to watch it when it comes on Halloween. I got a DVR now, guys. I'll set up my DVR and I promise I'll watch it. I promise. I feel bad because I know this movie is incredible.
It must be watched. Okay, what do you got?
Film's phenomenal. I didn't want to repeat directors, so I have my Carpenter movie, and I've chosen that movie, and that's the movie that I'm going.
I respect that thinking. That's how Happy Feet got into my animated list the other day.
I didn't want to do 2 Carpenter movies because there were more movies that I wanted to talk about. Rob Bottin is literally just one of the most impressive artists of all time, though. Like legitimately, Rob Bottin's special effects for that movie are absolute masterpieces. So many of the 1980s and even 1990s, even 2000s effects haven't aged particularly well. They're kind of dated. But the thing, it doesn't look photorealistic, but it feels real in the same way that something like American Werewolf in London feels very, very real, because you can see that it's happening. Even if it's foam and rubber and latex, you can see that it's happening. And you're willing to make that jump, that suspension of disbelief easier, because it's a concrete thing that you're looking at, and you're looking at something moving and changing and developing. And I think that's so impressive. The thing that always kind of jumps out to me about the film is that, like, in comparing it, as I often do, to Carpenter's Halloween, is that Halloween I think does more with less. And that's kind of my short statement on why I picked Halloween over The Thing, but obviously we're going to talk about Halloween later down the line. But yeah, The Thing's a masterpiece. Of course it is. It's one of the greatest movies of all time.
I actually also think that
Yes, I am.
it's one of those movies that a lot of reboots make the error of trying to give more than you need. Nobody knows where the thing came from. Nobody knows where it is. You don't even know if it's taken care of in the end, or if it's just waiting there, sitting next to another person. When
Spoilers.
all right, spoilers, fuck.
Right? You're yelling at me for spoilers.
Anyway, when they did the reboot, they kind of tell you where it came from, how they found it, and it lessens it.
Yeah.
It lessens the idea of what the thing originally was. And they also, yes, I know, horrifying. And they also use a lot of CG in that one that looks like shit compared to the practical effects from 25 years earlier. People need to figure out what makes things great before they try to imitate them. So we're moving on. We're going back to Douglas now. Oh, for the record, Kirk is the only one with 0 yikes so far. So we're going to Douglas with number 3.
My number 3 is a movie that was mentioned a couple of seconds ago. John Carpenter's Halloween, the original. I think this movie, for what it was. Oh, I'm sorry. Is that a yikes or same
No, no,
spot or
you're good.
no? Okay, cool. I think this movie is incredible. I think what it does with as little as it has to do with, as someone mentioned earlier, is what makes this movie just superb when you sit down and watch it. I watch it every Halloween. No pun intended. Excuse me for 1 second. I didn't want to do that on camera, but I did. Hopefully nobody heard it. I think the character of Michael Myers, originally being just the shape, was perfect because that's exactly what it needed to be. You didn't need a backstory. You got a little bit of one, but you didn't need an entire backstory where he was mentally ill. You just needed a character that wanted to do evil deeds. I'm sorry.
Live show, people.
I've been technically sick for 2 months, but yeah, Halloween 3 on the table.
Halloween 3?
No, 3 Halloween.
Oh. Season of the
Okay,
Witch?
really.
Well,
You had it at 9, right?
I had it at 9, yeah. Halloween is John Carpenter's masterpiece, and it's, to me, the masterpiece of the slasher genre. I brought up Texas Chainsaw as a slasher movie, but I don't really think it's that. I think if you're getting to the archetypical slasher movie, it's Halloween. Everything that Doug said is true. It does so much with so little. And you know, in terms of like the recent Halloween reboot and Halloween H2O, we've kind of learned to view Laurie Strode as this like badass like horror action chick in the kind of Ellen Ripley, Sarah Connor vein. But I don't actually think that's anywhere near the most effective way of looking at her. Like, she's just a person. She's just a teenager who just has this psychopathic killer after her, and she's just trying to survive. And Jamie Lee Curtis is so human in this movie. She's so sympathetic. She's so understandable. She just feels incredibly real. And just everything in this film, from the minimalist score to the camera work to the atmosphere to a very, very good performance from Donald Pleasance, who's probably not necessarily in the movie as much as you might think he is, but like he really gives such an impact. To the fact that one of the things that I find insane about this film that no one points out is that you see Michael Myers' face in this movie. Laurie Strode takes off his mask, and he's just as dead behind the mask as he is with it on. And that's so crazy to me. Like, that's so insane. Like, he's just so blank, so evil, so expressionless, like with or without the mask. It's genuinely like one of the few films from that period of time that I still do find scary. I genuinely think like it's just, if you wanted to point to someone and say that's a slasher movie, that's a horror movie, that's a serial killer movie, I'd point to Halloween. It's unbelievable.
So Luca is not woke to strong females. Okay. And Kirk, why do you like Ghost of Mars better than this?
It's just a great cinematic experience. I know to tell you, man. No, like I said, guys, I'm just not a slasher guy. I know plenty of people who love this movie. I mean, one of my best friends is. This is his go-to horror movie, and you know he's always pushing it. And it's really not my thing. But like I said, it's awesome you guys like it, and I really don't have it against them. It's just, again, there's other types of horror movies I like better.
I would say that it's actually another example like this is in Joe Massacre that I think the original should have probably left alone. A lot of people, this guy here, like Halloween Part 2, which I think it kind of ruins a lot of the mystique of the original. People say that it kind of works as a companion piece, but I really don't like it. In the original, they don't even mention that Laurie is related to Michael. That was something that was added later, and I don't think it. Don't think it was necessary. And then they have tried to do make this thing into a franchise at least 4 different times, and they keep coming back to the original because it's the best one and it's perfect as it is. So
I would ask you a question, Nazario.
Yeah.
Do you think it would have been better if they would have went with the Season of the Witch route and kept like the anthology
Yes, because then you could say that it was just a series of movie that center around Halloween. Actually, Season of the Witch works really well as a standalone film. I think if you take a lot of the sequels, Season of the Witch is one of the top ones because of that particular thing, because it works as a movie and it doesn't need anything else. And I actually definitely think that I would give props to the 2018 one. I actually think that is a very solid, good effort to making a sequel to the first one. But other than that, and maybe H2O, I'm
H2O is
not.
good. But like, I
What?
think that at the end of the day, like, how effective an ending for a horror movie is this? Like, they have the climactic final battle, they have the Donald Pleasance shooting him and him falling over the thing, and then you have the reconciliation with Jamie Lee Curtis and Donald Pleasance, and then they turn it, he's not there, and that's just how that story ends. Like, how great is that as an ending, right? Like, it's so perfect. I agree. I don't think you need anything to put onto that.
Okay, now let's go to Luca. What do you got for number 3?
My number 3 is a film that it has a sequel that people often call like, it's one of the sequels that's better than the original, and I just do not think that's the case at all, because Ridley Scott's Alien is just perfect.
Yikes.
Sure.
Alien is a horror movie. Aliens.
Shh. That's the one that you can pick on me, because my Halloween choice was Halloween 2018. I didn't want to say anything.
Okay, let's go to Kirk. What do you have for number 3, Kirk?
We touched on these movies briefly earlier. My number 3 is the original 1931 Boris Karloff Frankenstein.
Yeah, movie's incredible.
And it's a great movie, and I mean, we can argue there are probably better movies that we've talked about or we will talk about. But I had to have this one on my list, and I had to have it this high, personally for me, because of the character of Frankenstein's monster. I just connected to that character so deeply. It's such a great portrayal and analogy of humanity. That scene where he's locked in the tower and they open up the skylight and he looks up and just like, why? And he has no clue. I mean, that is just all of us. And I just connected with that so much, and just that idea of being thrust into the world and having no idea why, what to do, and just screwing everything up. I can relate to that. And I think they do a better job. And I mean, this is one of the few early Universal movies that I think actually did a better job of telling the story and conveying the themes than the book did. I think it actually improved on the original novel, where it made the monster a little more sympathetic. Where in the book he's actually more devious, more sinister. And this, sorry, my wife's an English teacher. She's yelling at me for knocking the book. But this is a just the portrayal Karloff. And I know a lot of people like Bride of Frankenstein better. For me, it's where the character starts to get a little more cartoony. That's where you get like everything like the parody, like fire bad, when he starts talking and all that. It's for me, it all comes down to the character in this book. And there's a lot of other great things about it, too. I'm focused on the character. It's just it's well shot. James Whale did a great job directing this. Colin Clive is great as Dr. Frankenstein. But for me, it's really the connection to the character that put this movie so high on my list. And Andrew, I do agree with you. The book is amazing. I just like the movie a little better.
I actually, I guess I fall into one of those people that think that the sequel is better. I think Bride of Frankenstein, out of the original 3, which I think work best together before they started deviating actors. Bride would be my number 1. Son and the original are actually closer than you would expect, but I do respect what you mentioned, that it was more mysterious and more, I don't know, it had a great ambience with the monster the less he was communicating. And since it was the first time that it was portrayed, it was also the first time you had to figure out where the character was and who it was was going to be in the long run.
Sure.
It's a solid pick, and I'm really surprised that Luca doesn't have anything to do with Frankenstein in his list. What happened?
I mean, Son is my favorite of the Frankenstein movies. I think that Bela Lugosi is incredible in that movie, and I think that there's a more interesting through line with Son. If I was to think of like terms of pure horror movies, I probably would have picked Bride also. I actually don't agree at all with your opinion about the portrayal of the monster in Bride. I think that the scene between the monster and the blind monk is the best character moments that the monster has in the entire series. And I think that to say that that's goes into anything parodical is kind of a bit of a fallacy. I think that if anything in Bride is parodical, it's the Ernest Thesiger Dr. Pretorius character. There is more comedy in that movie than there is in the original Frankenstein. The reason that I don't have it on my list is because I like these 10 movies better.
Douglas, have you seen Frankenstein, the original one?
Yeah, this one I have seen, guys. I have seen this one. I do like this movie a lot. I remember sitting in my 6th grade class, and my teacher during Halloween, we kind of got Friday movie day, and we got to watch the original classic monster movies. And out of all of them, I love Frankenstein the most. I think he's the most human character out of all of them. It just didn't make my list. I don't have a good enough excuse why it didn't. Maybe I just I am full of shit and I am on trial. It's okay. Kirk, I love your list though. It's great. At least
Thanks,
I'm nice about it.
I have to say, I actually also like the Frankenstein monster the best. And I'm actually going to start rewatching pretty soon a lot of the Universal Horror movies because I'm going to Universal Horror Nights and they have a house. And I like it.
Hey.
So,
Go see The Black Cat. That movie's incredible. Way underrated. The Black Cat is so good.
okay, I think we're done with number 3s. So let's start with number 2. Douglas, what do
My
you have?
number 2 is I think it was a yikes from earlier. It's The Exorcist. I love this movie. You'll notice that all these movies, the top 3 for me, are movies that I watch every year for Halloween, because they've become a staple for my Halloween. Just ever since I seen it, I remember watching this on basic cable, and them having to cut out some of the scenes because they're too grotesque, and then finally getting to see it on VHS and being like, maybe I shouldn't have watched that so young. It's kind of terrifying. Demons possessing people? Who let me watch these movies? I did, because I snuck up and watched them. No, but I really, Linda Blair in this movie is phenomenal. As a child actor, just carrying the role she did. She played 2 characters in this movie. The demon and herself, and the child I just, in this movie, I have probably the most versions of this movie on DVD or Blu-ray. I don't have it on 4K because I don't have a 4K player, but yeah, I just really enjoy this movie. The puking scenes are some of the funniest and horrifying scenes. The scene where the cross basically gets stuck to his hand is kind of terrifying when he tries to pull it away. When it goes kind of sub-zero, there's so many graphic scenes in this movie that just kind of stay with you. Just in general, the creepiness of it, the suspensefulness of it. Did they cure her? Which you find out maybe later they didn't. And it kind of kicked off a whole genre of films that I kind of like. So yeah, that's why it's number 2.
I think Luca had this also in his list, number 6.
Number 6. The movie's a fucking masterpiece. What I find so interesting about this film is that it doesn't sacrifice the mythology of the movie for the human story, and it doesn't sacrifice the human story for the mythology of the movie. The kind of the lore behind the Pazuzu being and where it's coming from is very much intact, and the sort of backstory behind the idea of exorcism and the thematic groundwork for that is very strongly laid. But also, it's very, very much a story about Damien Karras and his own personal battle with his faith. You mentioned Linda Blair playing two characters. I think it's very important to note that Mercedes McCambridge is also like an extremely important part of the Pazuzu character, because that voice, I don't know how Mercedes McCambridge and Linda Blair managed it, but it sounds like they come from the same person, and they just don't. Which I think is a really, really incredible thing. Frances McDormand is also sorry, not Frances McDormand. Ellen Burstyn is also incredible in this movie. I don't know why I said Frances McDormand. Ellen Burstyn is phenomenal in this movie. It's such a sympathetic portrayal of a mother and daughter. There's such a strong and foundational level of love between them, and this feels like a real mother and daughter, and it feels like this is something that could really happen. And I think that's what's the scariest thing about it. Like it feels like a story that could happen to someone who lives next door to you almost. And I think it's really incredible because of that, because it manages to make something so fantastical and so out there real and plausible and terrifying because of that. It's incredible.
This movie is one of the classic horror films from the 70s, and it's one of those that expand beyond the genre and become kind of part of the pop culture. I actually went to see it in theater for the first time when they re-released the extended version, and they made such a big deal out of the spider walk, and the spider walk ended up meaning nothing.
It's like one of the worst scenes in the movie.
It happens, and then it's over. It doesn't build to anything. It doesn't do anything. And I was like, that was pretty random. I wish they just had kept the original version and shown that one. But yeah, this movie is a classic for a reason. It's the story is all around. And as I was raised Catholic, so this was just like my mom, like, see what happens if you don't do the things you have to do and you go to church and you pray, you can get the devil in you. It's horrifying. So, Kirk, would you have liked this better if it was in French?
I gotta be honest. I have not seen The Exorcist.
Jesus Christ!
And
Hey.
this is
Kirk Kowalkowski seen all of the horror movies except for the ones that matter.
well. Here's the thing: is The Exorcist is come on. The Exorcist is another one of those movies where it's like I've seen enough of it to know I need to see it, but I don't necessarily want to see it. It's one of those ones that's always floating at the top of my watch list, and when it comes to time to watch to watch The Exorcist, I conveniently find something else that has like less projectile vomiting, and so it's like I want to see it. I need to see it. It's something.
It's well worth a watch.
It's a flaw that I have not seen it, but I'm sure it belongs on both your lists.
It most certainly does. So we're moving on now to
I didn't
Luca.
get on trial till number 2. That's pretty good. It took me all the way to number 2 to get put on trial. I think that's a record.
Give me your number 2, Luca.
I think the yikes for me stop here. My number 2 is an Italian film from the 70s. It's all 70s from here on out, by the way, as far as I'm concerned, because it's just the best.
I'm glad you said that before, so I don't have to ask you which one is it. But
I'm talking about. I actually have a shirt from the remake.
Hey,
but this is the Dario Argento Suspiria. I spoke a little bit about Texas Chainsaw Massacre and how I think that it's a real shame and a cliche that horror films feel the need to be set in the dark at night in shadows, and have all that kind of very dark, very things jumping out at you from the black kind of thing, because Suspiria is just so colorful. It's a movie about a girl who goes to a dance academy to learn how to dance, and she finds out that the dance academy is, spoiler alert, run by witches, and tries to get to the bottom of what's going on there. And it's just, it's a movie about a dance school, and a lot of it feels like it's paced like a ballet or a fairy tale. There's an otherworldly, ethereal quality to it, and it's also kind of like punk rock in that it's absolutely coated in day glow and neon colors and this kind of kick you in the face attitude to it. It's Dario Argento is such an interesting filmmaker because he went from these like very kind of black glove stalker thriller serial killer movies to these very supernatural fairy tale-esque type things, which I think are just mystifying. The film has a lot of like callbacks to kind of old Germanic culture, the history of fascism in Italy, and kind of old world versus new world type themes. But more than that, it's just an absolute riot from start to finish. There's never a dull or unenthralling moment in it. It's one of those films that genuinely, from top to bottom, everything in it feels like it's a piece of art. And it's one of those films that I wouldn't feel it would be inappropriate to like just screen it in the Louvre or whatever. I just think it's a masterwork from an incredible artistic mind.
There's nothing scarier than ballet.
I did ballet for 7 years. It's terrifying.
This movie is actually, like you said, it's a very classic film. But I actually do also want to give props to the remake because they actually just took the general concept, but they did a completely different film. I actually think both movies are great on their own right and for completely different reasons. But that is a discussion for another day. Suspiria in this, the original D'Argento one, I think is the. I'm not sure on this. Is the first one he considers part of the Mother trilogy, right?
Yeah. So there's Suspiria, Inferno, and then Mother of Tears, which are the three mothers. One 70s, one 80s, one 90s. Suspiria is the first.
Yeah, and I actually think I've seen two of the three, and I think Suspiria is the one I think consider the most memorable. And
Inferno is great too, by the way.
Yeah. So, guys, no Suspiria for you.
I'll show you right here. I want to prove it to you. It's on my 2B queue. I'm actually planning on watching this. If I wasn't studying for movie trivia last week, I would have watched this for Halloween.
You should watch Akira as well.
You should watch Akira.
I've already watched Akira. That's okay. I take it off the list. But yeah, it's definitely up there for me. I've been wanting to see this for a long time, and like I said, because of trivia, I've been watching so much stuff that I have to watch. That I get a chance. This with being October, I'm trying to watch the horror movies. This is definitely top of the list. I should have watched it before the show, so I didn't get judged. But I definitely want to see it.
Wait a minute, Kirk. I think we might have a match coming up soon. So, Exorcist, Suspiria.
Oh, on my watch list now, buddy.
I want to write that somewhere. Douglas.
In the same vein as Kirk, I've gotten a chance to see this movie. On trial right there with you, Kirk. It's on a short list. I mean, ever since I heard the late great John Schnepp mention it on whatever they called the show back then, Nightmares. It changed his name a couple times. I wanted to see it. It's just a matter of finding it and finding the time.
Schnepp's first ever movie trivia Schmodown match with Dennis Zhang in his team match, his first ever one, he walks out in a Suspiria shirt.
Yeah, I remember seeing the shirt, yeah.
Free on Tubi. Free on Tubi.
The finding part is important because a lot of the films mentioned here are not that easily accessible. Mm-hmm. And that's why one of the things I miss from the good old days, man, I got Suspiria in VHS. So that was pretty sweet. So now we're rounding up number 2 with Kirk. Will this be his first yikes?
From the conversation we've had so far, I don't think so because it has been brought up in passing. My number 2 is George A. Romero's 1968 Night of the Living Dead. This one holds a special place in my heart. George Romero is a Pittsburgh guy, filmed this movie in Pittsburgh. Evans City, Pennsylvania is about 30 minutes away from my house. I've been there. I've been to the cemetery. Everything looks exactly the way it did in the movie, and it is just so surreal to be there. But Night of the Living Dead, George Romero, he created a genre. He invented a new monster mythos. Everything we talk about, the old standbys, Frankenstein's monster, vampires, werewolves, mummies, all these things. I mean, those are from the previous century or further back. He created a mythos for the 20th century. And those monsters now are right up there with that in that echelon of iconic monsters. So he invented that. He took that. He invented that. What Luca was talking about earlier with all the other zombie movies, that idea of bringing people together and making that microcosm of society, and what that put that pressure on them to and see, just basically put it on them and see how they react, how they respond, and bring out their real selves. We see that in every zombie. We see that's The Walking Dead. That's that trope's been done to death now, but he did it originally. He did it the best. And what I love about these movies, starting from this one, even going on to the sequels, is the inevitability of the zombie. It starts out there at the farmhouse. There's one zombie just wandering towards them. It's harmless. It's not going to hurt them. They can dispose of it easily. By the end of the movie, they're surrounded. And then you go, sequel. A couple of movies later, they've taken over the world. And just that sense of dread and inevitability that the zombie brings, and everything that represents, is just so great. And it's just such an amazing way to tell a story, and amazing way to tell a horror movie. So yeah, this is no secret, I love zombies. It's one of my favorite subgenres of horror, and this is the original. This is the best.
Dude, I am right there with you. I love zombies too, and it's especially what you just said. It's the inevitability of it. And if you think about it, it's never actually the zombies that beat us. We beat each other because human beings put in an extreme situation like that can just be very, very selfish. And instead of working together for a better solution, everybody just tries to run for their lives and figure out, for me and maybe one more person, what I want to do to keep us alive. Fuck everybody else. And even though I think he reached his pinnacle with Dawn of the Dead, the first sequel, I do respect going back to the original, because it did create a new kind of monster. It did establish something different that wasn't been done before. Respects to George Romero, because I do believe that he made the best series of zombie movies, even though the Italian ones that kind of spin off from his are pretty good on their own way. I do find myself surprised that people later were upset when he started messing with it, like in Land of the Dead, when the guy gets the gun and he learns how to use it, and people were like, "That's not what fucking zombies do." And I was like, "That is the dude that invented the stuff. He can do whatever he wants.
Yeah,
just take it." And then he gave us survival and diarrhea and ew, and then I couldn't make that argument anymore. But for the first part of his career, I pretty much. The first 4 films, I really think, are the top of the cream of the top of the zombie genre. And I know Luca doesn't like zombies. Douglas, why do you hate zombies?
Listen, we got this argument last time. I don't hate zombies. I just happen to like faster zombies. I like more of a threat. And yes, I can understand the argument of it's inevitable and they surround you. I would die in a zombie apocalypse. I'm fat. I can't outrun anybody. I'd be a fucking zombie, guys. But I enjoy zombies that hold a more urgent threat. Not that I don't love this movie. I even love the remake. I think the remake's done pretty well too. The first one is incredible. The 1980...
90, I think.
1990?
Yeah.
The Tom Savini one?
The Tom Savini movie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Movie sucks.
I even like Land of the Dead. So
I like Land of the Dead a lot too. I like Diarrhea of the Dead.
I think Land of the Dead's incredible when he's like, "Oh, zombies are becoming intelligent now." Yeah, Rule 1 doesn't apply to me.
Shut the fuck up about Zombieland.
Listen, I can do seatbelts and double tap. That's about it. Cardio, I'm 25 yards, maybe. Oh,
no.
That's a hot take. That's a hot take for whoever's running that.
That's not hot. That's just wrong.
Get your millennial self out of here, man.
Kaleb Koho is like a post-millennial.
But I do like the movie. I like the movie a lot. I just put 28 Days Later because I like it a little bit more.
Do you have any comments on this one, Luca?
I think Night of the Living Dead's a masterpiece. Like, it's not that I don't like zombies as much. It's just that it doesn't like personally resonate with me. Because like this was probably like my number, like 12 or 13. I like the idea of the inevitability, and I like the idea of the kind of microcosm of society. But I think that like films like Texas Chainsaw or what's eventually going to be my number one, I think do that microcosm slightly better, and I like them more because of it. George Romero is an incredible master. I think it's important to note that he's working from the I Am Legend book, and he presents them in a way that's accessible to film populations. But he is working from previous sources, and there's also like I Walked with a Zombie and White Zombie and things like that, which have a different take on things. But like, I don't think it's as completely original a creation as a lot of people say that it is. But it is an absolute masterpiece and deserves to be held in the highest respect. And putting it as the number 2 of all time, I think, is a reasonable thing to do.
Okay, so we're gonna move on to number 1, and for this one, I'm gonna change the order a little bit because we have still 2 yikes from earlier coming up. So since Luca has the only one that hasn't been mentioned at all, I'm gonna leave him for last. Let's go first with Douglas. What is your number 1 horror film of all time?
Number 1 horror film of all time
Is it?
Claustrophobia. I don't care what Nazario says. The sequel still counts as a horror movie sequel, and that is Alien. I fucking love this movie. This is the epitome of horror. You stick somebody in one of... You can't be heard in outer space. That's where that line comes from. Listen, claustrophobia is a real thing. I had it this entire movie. I was like, can we get out of this space, please? There's something that's going to happen, and I don't want to be here. But I absolutely watched this movie. It might have been like this, like through 90% of it the first time I seen it, but I really enjoy this movie. The suspense is ridiculous. I think it's Kaleb Koho, you can say what you want. It's still a horror movie sequel. Don't care. Haha. Boom. 2 of us on the list had it at number 1. But no, Aliens, just like Aliens, I think Alien is just an amazing horror film. I think it adds so much suspense and something that you didn't get to see at the time, which was outer space meets claustrophobia meets you're gonna die because there's nobody else that can save you. And it also gave us an amazing character with Sigourney Weaver playing Ripley. Anybody that thinks that she's not one of those strongest females, guess what? Get away from her, you bitch. Plain and simple. I know that's a sequel line, but it's still one of the best lines ever. Yeah, Aliens. Everybody else, whatever. I like this movie.
This is actually also in the top 3 of Luca. He had it at number 3.
I did indeed. Aliens is not a horror movie; it's an action movie. But Alien is a horror masterpiece. I think it's Leonard Moulton who, on a Bravo thing, said that Alien is gothic horror in space, and I think that's incredibly appropriate because the whole thing about gothic horror is you put people in an enclosed space and you kind of watch them fall apart as the claustrophobia and the oppressive atmosphere of the place gets to them. And Alien is essentially a haunted house floating in space. I find funny that the tagline of the film is "In space, no one can hear you scream," but a lot of the movie is people screaming audibly. In space, no one can hear you scream, but in a spaceship, they can. I think that that movie goes for so long without anything happening in terms of like a jump scare or a monster or anything like that. Like, there's so much of getting to know these people, getting to kind of just hear about their pay disputes and their work disputes and that kind of thing, and hearing how they interact as a community of people, and then them going down to the alien planet. And it's very sci-fi at that point, very much like, what is this new world that we're exploring? And then there's a kind of quiet, tense period where you don't know what's happened to John Hurt's character, and then it all goes. in a flash, suddenly it's claustrophobic. It's people tearing each other apart. It's there's a monster, we don't know where it is. And it has such an incredible like first half an hour, 35, 40 minutes of build up. And what I find so incredible about it is that the alien itself is not the only horror in this movie. The interactions between Ripley and Ian Holm are incredible. Like the scene where Ian Holm, Ash, is revealed to be what he is
Spoiler alert!
terrifying. I said what he is. I didn't say specifically what that was. It's terrifying. It's horrifying. Spoiler alert: he's a robot. He's a robot full of whipped cream or something. But there's the horror in that movie comes from so many places, and I think what is most ignored by people when they see it is the horror of humanity in it. The fact that this is such a horrendous, awful, terrifying creature, and we're trying to harness it. How terrifying is that we think we can even begin to do that? That's insane. It's a masterpiece. It says a lot about us, and it says a lot about how we react when we're in a confined space with something that's out to get us, and how we kind of put ourselves in situations like that. Aliens sucks, by the way.
I agree that this is one of the most surprising horror movies from the late 70s, and I think Ridley Scott was hitting his stride when he made this, because yes, it's a monster film, it's a claustrophobic film, but I think it's one of the first times that they actually set that in space. So it enhances the fact that you cannot run away. And I wouldn't say Aliens suck. I would say it's not a horror movie. I think it's a pretty good sequel. And I am one of those guys who will actually defend David Fincher's Alien 3 because
fuck that.
I really love Alien 3. It's in my top 100 movies of all time. I like how he made something different with what was pretty much established, but we're not talking about that today. So, no Alien for Kirk?
I'll let you behind the scenes here a little bit, peek behind the curtain. My list for this show kind of came out fully formed. Like when I was making the list, I kind of knew what was going to be on it, basically the order. Like it was just kind of there for me. And like, I've made pretty clear a lot of these choices are a little personal for me. On an objective list, top 10 horror movies all time, Alien belongs on it. Deserves a high spot on it. So, no complaints about it. Like Luca said, it's a haunted house in space. How awesome is that? It's scary. It's terrifying. Nazario, as you were saying about some other franchises, I think this is a movie that should have been left alone. I think it completely falls off a cliff right away. Aliens is not just an action movie. It is an 80s schlocky garbage action movie. Like he does so many other things. James Cameron ruined it. And I actually like 3 and 4 better than 2. 2 is just so cheesy and bad. I hate Aliens. It's just such a bad movie.
Prometheus is like leagues better than Aliens. I'll say that for sure. Yeah,
Aliens is really bad. But I think this would have been, if we would have just had this one movie by itself, I think it just would have been better for all of us. But yeah, it belongs here, definitely, no doubt.
I would actually say that Prometheus it's a very solid film. I really like Prometheus. I kind of hate Alien Covenant.
Oh, I despise Covenant. I hate Covenant more than most movies.
I think he
because I hate a movie from the 80s. That's Old Man Kirk. Shut up, Boatman. You're 100.
I think actually that Ridley Scott felt the pressure after the backlash of Prometheus, and he tried to make something that would please everybody, and ended up pleasing no one because it just does not work. I honestly think that the original Alien, Prometheus, and Alien 3 are the more original of the whole series. But
Alien 3 is original and it captures the spirit of the original Alien. The issue with it is that it's fucking awful. Like, it's a terrible movie.
Yikes. It has my favorite version of the alien when he comes out of a dog and he has like a physiological animal. That is actually pretty freaking sweet. Okay. Hot take time over. Let's move on. And now I'm going to Mr. Kirk because What is this? A yikes on
Yeah.
Mr. Cook's list?
If you've been paying attention, by process of elimination, my number one is The Shining. This is another choice. I mean, obviously, it's a classic. It is what it is. For me, it's very personal. I saw this movie for the first time when I was about 5 years old. I had parents who worked night shift and very irresponsible with their siblings, so I got to see this movie probably a lot earlier than I should, and it formed a lot about my attitudes about movies and just what to be afraid of and what was scary. Yeah, this movie is Kubrick just was off the rails on this. If you've seen the documentary Room 237 and just how all the crazy stuff he put into this, the way he treated his cast, the way he made it, like, it's almost like I feel like the audience is a victim in this movie, and not in the sense that it's a bad movie, but the audience is meant to experience the dread and the terror and the just the unknown and the uncertainty of this hotel and what's going on, along with the characters. It's just Nicholson in this movie. I think this is probably his best performance. Just completely unhinged, and where he's able to go and what he's able to do with his character. And again, the family dynamic of having a child there, and even though he has these powers, him being the victim of all these things around him, it's just terrifying. And I mean, I can tell you stories about when I was a little kid, the nightmares I had about this movie, but I love it. It's an all-time classic. It definitely deserves to be high. I'm glad it made everybody's list, but I definitely thinks it deserves to be this high.
Stephen King doesn't know what he's talking about. This movie is a great version of his movie, of his book. So I'm going first to Douglas because he had it at 6.
Yeah, I love this movie. I think it's a great movie. Do I think it's as good as the book? Absolutely not. Do I think that Kubrick and Nicholson take very, 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 very what they think they're doing as a great adaptation of who Jack Torrance is? They do very liberalness with this character. Jack Torrance is, at the end of the book, kind of redeemable. Jack is never redeemable in the movie. But talking about specifically the movie, I do find this movie, for what it is, great. I think 6 is the perfect spot for it, if we're going to bring it up. I think 1's a little high, but no, Kirk, hey, everybody has their own taste.
And I'll say this too, I love the book, and for me, I can live in a world where we have the book and the movie, and we have those two different interpretations of that story. I completely understand Stephen King, not being a fan of what Kubrick did with it, but I think I think the book's a masterpiece. I think the movie's a masterpiece. I just think they're two different stories. That's all.
Oh, I agree with you. I agree with you. I can deal with both.
And Luca, you had it at number 8.
Yeah, I weirdly, I'm kind of, this is a weird spectrum going from Doug to Kirk to me, because this movie is so much better than the book. Just infinitely better than the book.
I'm turning my camera off and taking the mic down.
So what I admire so much about this movie is that I don't care that Jack's not a redeemable character, and I don't care that Jack's a crazy person that gets crazier, because that's a really interesting character. That's a really fascinating character. What the Overlook Hotel, if you have a situation in which Jack is just a normal, ordinary, everyday guy who's trying to be a good father who happens to be an alcoholic, and all of his insanity and all of his madness is just the Overlook imposing on him, which is kind of how I feel is the case in the book, you get a much less interesting character. Whereas it feels in the Kubrick movie like the Overlook is coaxing a little bit of Jack out of him. It's kind of bringing something out that was already there the whole time, and that it's preying on this particular part of Jack that just expands and expands and expands almost to bursting point. And I think that's so much more interesting than whatever the fuck was happening in the book and the miniseries, where it's just the Overlook kind of acting through Jack.
Are we bringing Steven Weber into this? Come on.
Yeah, fuck Steven Weber. Fuck that miniseries. But like, regardless of my opinions on the book versus the film, I think that Kubrick doesn't feel the need to over-explain and over-exposit in the same way that King does. He just kind of shows the Overlook doing what the Overlook does and how it affects those in it. What I love about this film so much is that the environment feels like a character, and there's a symbiosis of character and environment that I think is just incredible. Jack feels like a part of the Overlook, and the Overlook feels like a part of Jack. It's like these two entities were always destined for each other, and I think that that's such a terrifying thing. This place of such evil and this person who had such darkness inside him coming together. The sound design in this film is unbelievable, whether it's the carpet, or the score, or the just anything like the visceral sounds of things like the axe and the typewriter and that kind of thing is so brilliant. One of my favorite shots in the whole film is when it cuts from the plan, the model of the maze to the maze itself. I just think that's such an interesting, like, King complains about how it's like looking at ants in an ant farm, but I think that's very intentional and very, very well executed. I think that Kubrick is a master of cinema, and I think this is a masterpiece, and I think that it outshines anything King ever did on almost every level.
I never seen so many shocking faces on an argument where everybody likes the movie. But just because of the face he was making, Douglas, I give you like a quick rebuttal to anything you want to say.
Listen, Jack is being literally Jack Nicholson the entire fucking movie. This is the Jack Nicholson that you get through his entire career. This is not.
Have you seen Five Easy Pieces?
Have you read?
Have you seen Chinatown? Have you seen One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest?
Absolutely, and he goes over the board every time that he's on. It's his expression in his face. Jack Torrance is the character that is redeemable throughout the book because you know that he's an abuse character that basically becomes an abuser. But that's the entire point of him as a character, because Stephen King reflected in this with his own alcoholism, with his own thoughts of abusing his kids. I'm sorry if you didn't understand that. I'm sorry, but
no, I did understand that. He just wrote it badly. Like,
he obviously did.
I understand the motivation behind the character, and I understand what Stephen King is trying to do. He's just writing Jack badly. Like, I'm sorry.
Okay, sure.
And scene. Everybody back to your corners. That was hilarious. So we only have one. We only have one more to go. So Luca, because you explained so much the things before mentioning the titles, and you're gonna ruin my joke, I'm gonna say it now. Which version is your number?
Weirdly, we started my list with bees, and we end my list with something that's not at all related to bees. I promise. Do not bring up bees; it will hurt me. My number one horror movie of all time is also my number one movie of all time. It's The Wicker Man, Robin Hardy's 1973 movie about a West Highland Constabulary police inspector who goes to an island off the coast of Scotland in search of a missing child, and finds out that he has arrived in a place that is hostile to him and that is not going to let him get the answers that he needs. Kirk brought up this idea of Night of the Living Dead being kind of a societal microcosm, and The Wicker Man does that so brilliantly. The relationship between Edward Woodward as Sergeant Howie's kind of stiff upper lip conservative Christianity and Christopher Lee's joyous old gods, as it were, speaks so much to issues of colonialism, issues of Western intervention imposing belief systems on other parts of the world, speaks so much of kind of this imposition of a certain way of thinking on colonized peoples. And there's a point in this film where Edward Woodward says to Christopher Lee, I remind you that despite everything, you are still the subject of a Christian country, in a very authoritative, trying to impose his own code and belief systems, and he's just kind of laughed off. And that's such an interesting way of portraying the relationship between these two groups of people, and the way that typical affluent, stiff upper lip, class-based society approaches concepts that it can't deal with. The film had a really tumultuous production history. Initially, it was released as a B feature with a Nicholas Roeg movie called Don't Look Now, which is also one of my favorite movies of all time, and would have been on this list had I not had the opportunity to talk about it here, because it's an incredible film. It then Christopher Lee campaigned very, very hard for its re-release in a full cut version, and we've got something that's close to a full cut, but that has a lot of stuff taken out that is just completely lost, and it's beautiful. The music is incredible. Paul Giamatti and his band called Magnet compose and write a lot of the songs from it, and it actually uses traditional folk songs and interweaves them into its plot. Christopher Lee is incredible. He's basically better than he's ever been, and Edward Woodward gives the best performance of his career too. It's on the surface not a film that has a consistent amount of scares or jumps throughout, but it's so kind of horrifying by the time it gets to the end, because everything's built up to this suspicion, this mystery, this not knowing what's going on, this paranoia. It's symbolic, it's metaphorical, it's allegorical, it's beautiful, it's timeless and yet very much of its time. It's led by two incredible performances. It's just the best movie ever made by a filmmaker. And I think that it's an absolute masterpiece, and there is never going to be a film that I love more than it. If I doubt there will be one if I live to be 1,000 years old. It's just the best. I love it more than I love many things.
It's actually very weird that we actually brought up Midsommar at the beginning when we were talking about Hereditary, because they are not, I wouldn't say the same, but very similar in the concept, the general concept of the movie. And yes, The Wicker Man, the original version, is actually a very great movie that I'm a little surprised you're saying it's your favorite of every genre.
My favorite movie ever, 100%.
I wouldn't go that far, but I do actually think that it belongs in the top 10. And Douglas, did you see the Nicolas Cage version?
Yeah, so that's why I haven't seen the original version. I just thought it was going to be a rehashing, and I was like, I don't want the bees either. Not the bees. Sorry, I know you asked not to mention it, but it was mentioned in the comments. So I was throwing some love towards Kaleb Boatman. No, but in all honesty, I haven't seen the movie because I have had no kind of wanting to see this movie because of the remake, and it kind of like, I guess it hurt a lot. I don't know if I want to sit through that movie, even if it's a different premise towards the end. That movie just really tainted the palate.
For what it's worth, it's a different movie throughout, like almost completely different movie.
Yeah, to be fair. Kirk, why do you hate The Wicker Man?
I hate to be anticlimactic with the number one here, but I haven't seen this either. I really, honestly, I mean, I've never heard anybody hype it the way Luca has. I've heard it's good and everything, but I've never been told you have to see The Wicker Man. This is essential viewing. So it's just something that's kind of slipped through the cracks for me. Sounds interesting, and it's never been like I said, something that's I need to see this now.
Admittedly, this is my most personal pick, right? This is fine. The one where it's I've really enjoyed seeing this more than anything else, and
sure,
it's not as much of this is a classic, blah 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 blah.
Yeah.
Well, apparently we're way past the time we were supposed to do. Can you imagine if there had been 4 people? Whew! So,
Caleb, you shut the fuck up about Alexander Payne. You son of a bitch.
Now that we got everybody's list, I'm going to do a quick rating based on my own personal opinion, because I'm the host and I get to do it, so screw all of you. And I would have to say that after seeing the complete list of everybody, it's actually a pretty solid bunch of movies that wouldn't look that way on first watching, because they're so different, especially Kirk's that only has one movie that anybody else has. But I would say that everybody gets a B on different rankings. The lowest one, I would have to say, it is Douglas. B minus for you, because yes, you put a bunch of movies that I personally love, and everything going from like 7 on top. It was really great, and you did put it follow that, but you also put Pet Cemetery and Friday the 13th one. Took a little bit out of it. In second place, I would put Mr. Kirk, because his list was the most general complete. It had things from different parts of the world, which was very interesting, and it has a bunch of essential movies you need to watch, and some tip picks that I feel a little more personal that are actually really solid too. But he did not have One of the Dead, so you get a B. And Luca, you get a B plus, because I think it's the most overall excellent list. I am a little surprised though that you did not shove in Saw somewhere in there.
Those are bad movies. I love them so much, but those are bad movies.
Yeah, that would probably got you a lot more shit than it was deserved.
Be right down there to like D plus, sure.
I will balance that out as a solid B for the combined list based on all of your picks, which will I now read. Based on your picks, the number 10 is The Thing from John Carpenter. Number 9 is Wes Craven's Scream. Number 8 is James Whale's Frankenstein. Number 7 is Suspiria, Dario Argento's. Number 6, George Romero's Night of the Living Dead. Number 5, thanks to Mr. Fallon, is The Wicker Man. Number 4 is John Carpenter's Halloween. Number 3 is William Friedkin's The Exorcist. Number 2 is Ridley Scott's Alien. And number 1, the only movie that was in all lists, Kubrick's The Shining.
Look at that. Look at that. Kirk got number 1 for both.
That's a solid list. That's a solid list.
It's a real solid list.
I love when movies are better than the book.
Next week, guys, we get overrated films of the 2000s. Week after that, Oscars gone wrong, this time Best Actresses. And in 3 weeks, Disney soundtracks. So keep coming back. I'm sure that Cody will not allow this to run this long ever again.
Timers will be added.
Maybe I will if I ever get invited back. So
we're going for 3 hours next time, guys. Yeah.
Enter this, guys. You might be picked. If you suck, if you don't, who knows? Cody's kind of random. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Douglas, and Luca, and Kirk, and Koho for handling this thing. And we're out.